Hello, and we're still on lockdown. We're at home. As you can see, I'm in my garden where the fence needs a bit more stain on it. Yep, it's still April 2020 and I'm just filling up some space. I've been on a 7-day isolation, so I'm going back to work in 2 days, so I'm just making a few videos, and I'm sure you realise I've got the same clothes on as what I had on in the last 2 videos because I've just backed them on one after the other. Pretty much what I want to do is, I've been asked to do this several times in the past by subscribers, by you guys on the channel that make the channel what it is. I've been asked to basically explain how I have my camera set up, for what I use it for and how I use it. So I'm going to try and go over it. I haven't rehearsed this, so if there's bits on here that I'm not sure I use or I can't remember how to get to them, then just bear with me. But I will get round to explaining how my camera is set up. This is my camera. This is the Fuji X-T3, as you know I will use now. I've moved over from Canon and I've just done a video on my complete arsenal, Fuji arsenal, so maybe check that one out up in the corner. It's just got a full everything of what I use Fuji wise. I also had Canon. I've still got my Canon gear, which is still up for sale, or it's been up for sale. By the time this video goes out, it might have already been gone by now. I may have sold it on to MPB or whatever it is. So yeah, this is my Fuji X-T3. I had the X-T2 and the X-T1 before that. I just like this camera and I wanted it in the gunmetal or the silver because it's just a bit different to the other two that I had in black. So how do I have this set up? Well, I'm a landscape photographer now more than anything. There will be a few changes as and when I go along. Once all my Canon gear is gone and I'm using this only, I will probably have it set up slightly differently for other things, but for landscape photography I'm going to try and explain what it is I've got it set up as. I don't use many of the custom functions apart from the custom buttons. Pretty much as standard, all the other custom functions, there's one I use, but I'll explain that when I get to it. So standard setup, I've got the 1855 on for now, which is an image stabilized lens. On the front of the camera you have your manual, continuous and single shot mode. As you can see, I have it mounted with an L bracket. That's the first thing. Just ignore that for now because most of the time I use standard single shutter and occasionally I'll go on to manual, but I will come to that in one moment. So yeah, standard setting. I have an L bracket on the camera. The reason I've got an L bracket is I can go from horizontal to vertical as quick as that. Okay, this gives you a much better way for doing panos. When you're doing panos and you want to spin the camera round, it's much better than it is having the camera hanging off the side and spinning round like this. Plus you don't get any creeping, where your lens tends, you know, if you've got a heavy lens on there, it'll tend to creep down. So by having an L bracket, it just gives you a better way of mounting the camera. Plus with this L bracket I've also got this extra grip on it and it just gives you a nice way of holding onto the grip. I've also got on the camera these two Peak Designs clips, that's so I can put a strap on it or a hand strap if I've got it handheld. I know it's not camera setup, but it's basically the way I start with the camera. The camera's normally set in single shot mode. Reason being is I like to be able to switch it on and I like to be able to focus. Let's take the lens cap off. I like to be able to focus and away I go. Because I wear glasses, if I'm looking through my glasses, one, they're dark most of the time and it means I've got to sort of get my eye as close as I can, which isn't ideal. So I tend to look over my glasses. As you know, I look down over the top of the glasses, which is better for my eyes color wise, but then my eyes are slightly out of focus. So you can set the camera up, mine's set to positive. You can set the camera up so that it sees the same as what you see, but it's not great. So I do tend to use, 9 times out of 10 I use autofocus. And I have my autofocus, as you just noticed then, my autofocus is on the back button. But you can go in, you can get in, you can set up your function buttons. You've got one on the top, one on the front, 2 on the back. You can set your rear dial, your front dial, and you can set up these 4 clusters on there, all to do different things that you want them to do. So I've got this, the AF lock button, I've got that set, as you can hear, to my autofocus. That's called back button focusing. That means I can now focus on that. When I hit the shutter or I move the camera around, that's not going to affect my focusing, and it stays perfectly focused. Also in that mode, if you do flick it over to manual, and on manual you get the focus peaking lines, that way you can start manual focusing. You can still use this. That will still autofocus, even if this is moved out of focus. And I'm just going to test this just to prove this. I'm just going to test, and yeah, it does. I wasn't imagining it. It's something I've done in the past, and I stumbled across it by mistake. So I've now got a manual focus, and I've also got an autofocus when it finds something to focus on. That way, there you go. That way, I've got both functioning built in the same camera, which I didn't have on the Canon, or if I did, I didn't realise I did. So that's an absolutely brilliant function. But like I say, it's normally set to autofocus. But while we're on the subject of focusing, we'll go over onto manual, and like I say, I've got mine set up to as focus peaking. What that basically means is on focus peaking, it gives you I've got mine set to red, which gives you a red haze around the area that's sharp. So you can basically turn your focus ring, and you won't be able to see this on the camera probably, but if I focus on the chair, which is down in front of you, let's see if I can do this a way I can do this. Maybe on the Fuji, let's try it. See, we can't turn that around the other way. So if you can see that on there, as I turn it away from the focus point, this goes red. It's now red now, and then it comes off of the red. Basically that means it's focusing where the chair is. I don't have to get up close to it. I can see by the colours the bit of the bit of the photo that's actually in focus. So that's how I have my focus peaking set up for manual focus. Is as simple as that, really. Right, we've also got set up on my buttons, function buttons. On the front button, we have got it on face detection. So as I press the button on the front of the camera, which is this one here, I've got this down to face detection. So if I'm doing suddenly people walk into the scene, I can put it on face detection. I can then hit my focus, and it will track the faces, and it will pick up faces. I said this one's already set up for focusing. The top then is set up for aperture and fire. We've also got the AL lock. The AL lock is if I'm moving around and I put my finger on the AL lock, I can then focus on set the AL, the aperture to set the aperture. I can set my light to the sky. I can hold on to that button. I can then move down, and I can take the shot. That will keep it set to whatever that is up there. Same as I can take it from down here. I can set it on the shadows. I can move up to the sky, and I can take the picture. It basically locks your aperture and locks your light coming into the camera, or stopping your light getting into the camera to wherever you want to hold it to. It's just a function that I've used for when I was doing sports on the Canon. I just lock it off, and I can move around and click, and I can fire, and it sets the aperture up, or it sets the light up, and it doesn't go light and dark. So that's how I've got that one set up. 4 buttons on the back of the camera. So I've got these 4 buttons down here. When I press up, that takes me to my points of focus. So I've got single point of focus, small zone focus, and then I've got wide tracking, and then I've got all. On this camera, it's got a full body of focus points, and see you're going light and dark as I'm moving around, ever so sorry. Yeah, I've got a full set of focus points on the whole of the screen, and I've normally always got it kept on the single point, and my single point then is set by the size. So if I press down, I can then scroll the wheel on the back. Let's move it back to the middle by pressing that one. I can set this to a different size, and I tend to keep it so it's 3 sizes up from the smallest, which gives me a small box in the middle of the screen, so everything in that stays focused when I've got it locked onto there. So that's my down button. I then got my left button, and my left button takes me to my self timer, so I can put my self timer on. I can move it up to 2-second timers. When I hit the button, you get the bleep in for the 2 seconds, which I have on so I can hear it. And then on the right hand button, I've got my histogram set, so it brings up the set of histograms, so I can see them on the back of the camera. My different color histograms, I've got red, greens, blues and light. So that's what I have on there. I've also got swipe functions on the back as well. So on the back I can swipe across, and again this should bring up my histogram. In fact, I've got that one set to off. Let's go that way. That's my zebras, so that gives me my zebra peaking, which I don't like on. To bring it down brings my self leveler, and then if I go up, that's where my histogram is. So I've actually got my right not set to anything at the moment. You basically just swipe across the screen. So you can pick individual settings that you can bring up, film simulations and stuff like that. Also on the back of the screen I've got focus area set. Now if you tap the back of the screen you can turn that off. You can turn it to shoot, so I can actually press on the screen, say on the chair. It will focus on the chair. 2-second timer is going to fire off because that's where I last had it set, and away it goes. Then I can put that on to autofocus only, so it will focus on the area and wait for my command. And then I can have it on focus area. So basically where I want to focus on, let's go back off to that one, focus area. So where I want to focus on, I can then focus on that area, depending on whether it's a tree in the scenery or whether it's a lake and stuff like that. I can move it around the screen without having to use my little joystick, which is a little bit slower. So that's how I've got my camera set up, pretty much standard like that. I have it on RAW and fine. That way it gives me a RAW image and a fine JPEG. I don't use the JPEGs, but I use it on RAW, and it's on dual cards. Because I've got dual cards in the camera, we have 2 SD cards in the side. I have it shooting the both on RAW. So if I have a problem, I've got it on both cards. We also have the histogram on the screen. I've got a small histogram which you might not be able to see. There's a tiny little histogram just there, and I keep that on the screen at all times. I've also got a full display, but by pressing on the back display button I can clear that off. I get a full picture of what I'm looking at. I can bring up all the information that I'm shooting with, and then I've got my display set up so I can see what I've got, where the camera's set up and what it's doing. I've also have a grid on the back of my camera. The grid's set up all the time, so I can always see the rule of thirds, even though I know where my rule of thirds are, but I like to have the grid just to use. Sometimes I like to set things exactly on that crisscross of the thirds. I also have set a horizon line, so I've got a natural horizon line on there at all points. So when I move the camera around, it flicks over to green, and I know exactly straight away, without bringing the main line down, that it's level, without having to mess around. So that's that set up. Quite simple and quite easy. On the top of the dial, on the top of the camera, I've also got these function dials, and I have it to multi-segmenting most often. And because I use semi-automatic modes, I've normally got it set to aperture priority. I have it to multi-segmenting mode. The only other one I use is the center weighted. I don't tend to use the spot meter or anything like that. That would be from different genre like sports or people and things. But so I have it on multi-segmented, so it averages it all out to whatever it is, 12% grey, and then I work it out on histogram anyway and take the photograph where I want it. If I want more light in, I click it up one. If I want less light in, I roll it down. And it's as simple as that. On the Fuji, all I've got to do is roll it up or roll it down. I've got a little bit more light in, so the semi-automatic mode works just fine for me. I have got another function button on the top. I can't remember what I got it set to. That's actually set for a quick speed to 2-second timer. So that's what I've got that set to. It used to be set to Wi-Fi, and I was just checking then to see what I've got it on. Aperture priority. On the top of the camera, you can see I've normally got it set to aperture priority. The only other one I tend to use a lot of, if I flick it around to T, and that's timer, and on timer mode I've got it set so I can scroll the back dial and give me different time settings. So I can go from 4 minutes, 8 minutes, I can wind it all the way down. Can't see what it's doing now because it's got it sideways on. Where are we? We are at 1.345 and bringing it back down now. Now we're at 50, 100, 160, 200 a second, 400 a second, 640 of a second. So I can wind it up and down, and I can set the exposure to where I want it, or the time, should I say, on the T mode. But more often than not, it's set to A, and my ISO is set to 160. That's the standard setting, but again, I can wind it up and down to different settings. On auto, which I don't use very often, I think it's set to max out at 6400 ISO. I think that's what I've got that set to max on. Function wise, what else have we got that we use all the time? That's pretty much it. On the Fuji, we've got this little dial here as well. This little dial is a very quick one to use. It's single shot. Click it over one, we've got continuous, we've got high speed continuous, and then we've got bracketing. So really the only two I use is the bracketing and the single shot. So on bracketing mode, when we flick it over to bracketing, on the back of the camera, which you're probably not going to be able to see because it's way too far, it comes up with 5 little dots, and that means because I've got my bracketing set to 5. It is set, if I get this back to 0 for you, I'm going to explain what it's set to. So it's on 0 at the moment, and then we're now set to 2/3 increments. So I've got 5 exposures. I've got one at 0, and then I've got one at 2/3 over, one at 2 2/3 over, which is a stop and a quarter, is it? And then the same 2/3 down and a stop and a quarter down under. So I can set that base exposure either to 0 or to +1, -1, and then it will go +1 1 1/3 up and 1 1/3 down, but with 5 increments. You can set that to have one single stop in between. You can have 7 exposures. You can have 2/3 right up to 7 exposure, 7 either side. There's lots of different things you can do with it. So that's what I've got mine set on, is 5, and I can just rattle off, literally put the 2-second timer on, whack it up like that, focus it on the back button, done like that, hit the button. It's in aperture priority. I know it'll work the shutter speed out. Bang, 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 bang. 5 shots gone, over and underexposed, and I've pretty much got everything I need in one shot. It's as quick as doing that. There's no messing around. There are other functions on it, but I don't tend to use them. So that's pretty much how I've got my camera set up. White balance, I've got it set to 5600 Kelvin. I don't use auto white balance. I used to use auto white balance all the time. The reason I don't use auto white balance now is because it's constantly changing. So when you go into Lightroom, your images can all look slightly different. What I prefer is set everything to 5600 Kelvin. Then when I go into Lightroom, I can then put them right. We used to use, and I can't remember what it's called. We used to use one of the film simulations. And it was giving me a very yellowy colour, so that's pretty much why I do that. As for aperture, most of the time I'm on f8. Between f7.1 and f11 is about what I use most of the time, but I'll talk about that as and when I'm taking photographs and when you're watching this anyway. So that's my camera setup. 5600 Kelvin. Autofocus, I have it in boost mode so that it's constantly alive and it doesn't go to sleep all the time. I've got back button focusing, so I can quickly hit that. It's not going to change again. I can then move the camera around to wherever I want it to be, set the aperture, set my composer up, get the shot composed to where I want it. 2-second timer, I can hit the button on the top, 2-second timer's on, hit the button, bang, and away we go. There's no messing around. In semi-automatic modes, I know that I haven't got to work it out. If I was in now manual mode, I'd have to write, alright, well, let's go down to one there, and then I've got to adjust the ISO, then I've got to adjust that, and I've got to adjust, and I just can't be asked doing all that. I'd rather have it in aperture priority so it's ready to go. That's pretty much my camera setup. I hope that explains anything. If you do want any questions answering about how I use my Fuji, you're more than welcome to ask. Don't get technical with me because I don't work in a technical frame. I keep things simple, and that's the way I like to shoot. I can't think of numbers and work technical information out when I'm out on the field. I can't do it when I'm indoors in front of the computer, and I can't do it even if I've got it all written down. So my Fuji is set up for me the way I like it. It's simple, it's easy, and I hope that answers a few questions. So thanks for watching. Don't forget, check out future videos, check out some of the past videos, and yeah, let's hope we can get out and shoot properly soon, because it's getting really tedious keep doing stuff at home when all I want to do is walk around the hills and the mountains. So from me, I'm just going to say ciao, and see you next time.